Right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This is the first Supply Chain Executive Speaker Series of the year. My name is Lisa Ellerman. I'm a professor in supply chain management. I usually teach logistics, and it's great to have you all here. I'm sorry that the weather finally got nice on this day, and it hasn't been nice other days, so I extra appreciate having you here. We are really lucky to have with us today Brad White. He is currently a VP of Supply Chain Management for Textron Aviation, and some of you might be working on the capstone project that Textron Aviation is running right now in one of the capstone classes, so you might be familiar with them that way. But he's going to be telling you a lot more about their products as well as their supply chain. So as a VP of Supply Chain, he has a professional staff of over 200 people. He manages about $2 billion in direct and indirect spend. But the really exciting thing is that he is a Miami grad. So he graduated from here with a Bachelor's of Applied Science in Engineering Management and Electrical Engineering in 2007?
December of 6.
Okay,
yes.
So 2006. So not bad for how long he's been out. We're proud of you. Good work.
Thank you.
And he also, in the meantime, since he was not very busy once he started working, went and got his MBA in finance. And he also has a Six Sigma Black Belt certification. So he's going to tell us a little bit more about himself and Textron. So please join me in welcoming Brad tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I can't tell you how happy I am to be here back in Oxford. I don't know what it is nowadays on Thursday night, but when it's nice here in September, I appreciate you being here. And I think now you have 90s night, I hear. It was 80s night or 70s night when I was here, but now it's 90s night. So again, glad to be here. My name is Brad White, and I did study engineering. I work at a company called Textron Aviation. Just by show of hands, how many of you have heard of Textron or Textron Aviation? Wow, okay. We are very big, I would say, into hiring Miami graduates. So we'll be here next week, I understand, at the career fair, so please stop by. It's a school that we've partnered with at Textron, and we only target so many universities across the whole country. So we're very impressed with the caliber of the students and the curriculum that's taught and how well Miami graduates do at our company. So I've got some material prepared today. My HR group said I had to come and talk about Textron a little bit and get you interested and maybe have you stop by next week. So I'll take you through our company, Textron, but I'll also then kind of get into supply chain material. So I understand there's a lot of supply chain majors in the room here, and almost everybody has taken at least the intro to supply chain class. So we'll do some of that, and then I have just some examples of career experiences within supply chain to share, and then I'd like to leave time at the end for questions and answers, and I'll really, whatever's on your mind. It can be any topic. So that's the agenda. See, this works here. Maybe. That's all right, we'll do this.
I can push it forward, Brad, if you want.
I think we should take up his offer, the department chair's offer.
Push it forward?
I'll click them as you
Are you sure? Okay. Yeah. Okay, so just real quickly, I'll give you a high-level background of myself, and then we'll get into the material. But I am an Ohio native. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, so it's good to see that the Cleveland Browns did not lose all 16 games this year. Yes, round of applause. I am married. I'm a Miami merger, so I met my wife here at Miami. It's a classic fairy tale story. She was a Shakerette, and I was on the wrestling team, and we had a mixer, and then the rest was history. We do have 3 kids, and that's really the pride of my life. As you heard, I was an engineering major and then worked on an MBA at Wichita State. For those that are considering an MBA, my personal advice is to work a couple of years and then go work on an MBA. I think it'll be more meaningful to you. It's also easier to get through the classes because you have real relevant material at work that you can use as a reference point. But when I graduated at Miami, I went to career fair and was fortunate enough to get a job offer from Textron. At the time, Textron was offering and still is, a rotational program. It's changed names, but we call it the Leadership Development Program now. And for supply chain track, It's actually consisting of 4 different assignments in the first 2 years of your career, each 6 months in duration. So I started out at Cessna Aircraft at the time in Wichita, Kansas, as a buyer. Did that for 6 months. I moved to Greenlee, which is outside of Rockford, Illinois, in Chicago, and was a sourcing specialist. Then over to our Textron Systems division, which I'll talk about later, as a supplier development engineer. And then lastly, had an opportunity to go to Germany for 6 months at our Kautex division as a factory planner. So after that program, which was an outstanding experience and got a lot of exposure, decided I wanted to what we call repatriate full-time, and I chose Cessna Aircraft in Wichita, Kansas. And that was quite a transition coming from Cleveland and moving to Kansas, but it's been really great ever since, and I've been there the last 10 years. When I started at Cessna at the time, I went into the Six Sigma program and then worked on our Textron Black Belt certificate, but moved into supply chain as a purchasing planner supervisor. Did that a little while. I then moved to what we call production control and logistics, which is really factory planning, and had a managerial position there. And then out of the blue, really was given an opportunity to move over to our McCulley Propeller division as the general manager. And McCulley does about $30 million in revenue a year. It's part of the greater Cessna, our Textron Aviation family. So that was an outstanding opportunity with profit and loss responsibilities. I then moved back over into logistics as the director. Did that a few years. And then from there, moved into operations as the plant manager for our fabrication, machining, and sheet metal factories. And then last summer was asked to come over to supply chain. So I share that because that's not really atypical of what Textron does when it comes to career management. We're very big in really what we got from, I would say, General Electric, which is moving people around and giving them new experiences to grow their career paths. So Textron. I'm really impressed how many of you know about Textron. I don't know if you knew it before today or you did homework, but it's an outstanding company. Sometimes people don't know Textron, but they know our brands. And what you see on the slide here is a collection of all of our brands, and some of them are quite iconic. Bell Helicopter, for example, has been around and is a big part of the Textron portfolio. Cessna Aircraft, Beechcraft, which we'll talk more on a little bit, producing business jets and turboprop aircraft for general aviation. Easy Go golf carts is another big one that people recognize, part of the family. And if you're into snowmobiles, Arctic Cat was an acquisition we made just about 2 years ago. If you go to the airport and you look at the vehicles that are moving aircraft around out at the airport, Tug is a brand name that you might see. That's all that equipment is something we produce. So it's a collection of brands under the Textron portfolio. But what's neat about it is it's a manufacturing business. We like to say very simply that we make stuff. Everything from aircraft that fly to weapons for the military to golf carts to snowmobiles, hands-on products. And frankly, nowadays in the American economy, sometimes it's hard to find companies that still do that level of manufacturing. Quick video here I have to show on the products for Textron Aviation. I'm sorry, Textron as a whole company. It's working.
Everybody's got a family tree. But only ours has a helicopter that's flown by heroes. And a jet that crosses continents at just a hair under the speed of sound. Our family moves troops and tanks across oceans. We protect borders, explore unconquered lands, teach people how to fly so they can best serve our country. That's our family. And building the most advanced machines in the world is in our DNA.
So as I said, we make stuff, and it's really cool stuff too. A little more detail on the company. We are a Fortune 500 company. I think we're somewhere around 220 or so on the list. About just under $15 billion a year in revenue. We've got 35,000 employees worldwide across all of our businesses. It was a company that was founded back in 1920s by Royal Little. And it ended up actually getting into the textile industry right around World War II, which is where the name Textron actually comes from. Nowadays, there's not a single textile that we're producing unless it's going into a leather seat on a business jet. Some of the big acquisitions as the company grew through the years, as I said, was E-Z-GO in the 1960s, but also Cessna Aircraft, Beechcraft, and Bell Helicopter. We organize ourselves into 5 different, what we call business units, and I'll go through each of these in a little more detail, but Bell Helicopter, Textron Aviation, which is where I work. We have the industrial segment, Textron Systems, which is all of our defense products, and then we do have a finance business unit that's really only focusing on financing customers for our products. Textron Aviation, we'll start with that. Again, that's where I currently work. We produce business jets. We produce piston aircraft. Anybody a pilot in the room here? No? That's one of our challenges as a business, is there are not as many pilots nowadays. But if you were to go learn how to fly, I almost guarantee you that you would learn to fly in a Cessna 172. It's the most produced aircraft ever, actually, with over 70,000 of those flying. So we do everything from the small piston aircraft to a large business jet. We also do have a military division where we work on products for both domestic and foreign militaries. What you see in the picture in the upper right corner is what we call the Scorpion jet. And the whole business concept behind that is it's an economical attack version of a jet that can do certain missions that are overkill for something like a F-35 or F-16 fighter jet. It's a lot more affordable to fly and to buy. So very diversified business within aviation. We have customer service centers around the world, and we have more models in production than any other company in this industry. It's mostly located in Kansas, Wichita, Kansas, but we do have facilities around the world for service. We have a factory in Chihuahua, Mexico as well. Bell Helicopter, another very iconic name and brand. A lot of people know it by the rotorcraft that you see, which is the picture in the upper right there. This aircraft actually takes off like a helicopter and then rotates and flies like an airplane. So it's in movies. The biggest customer is the Marine Corps right now. It's called the V-22 Osprey. And it's really a type of technology that we have a joint venture with Boeing on, which is really revolutionizing how warfare is taking place. You can get into places that you cannot otherwise get into with that type of aircraft because it has the advantages of a helicopter and an airplane kind of put in together. It's a big company. It's mostly based in Fort Worth, Texas, or outside of Dallas, but also has facilities in Montreal, Canada, and Tennessee as well. Textron Systems is our defense business unit. It's kind of a collection of products here, so everything from armored vehicles, basically tanks, to UAVs, unmanned aircraft, to flight simulators, which you see in the picture in the middle there on the side. We actually provide simulators where you can teach pilots how to train without ever having flown an airplane. It's kind of a scary concept, but the imaging in this is like the best video game you could ever imagine. It's really neat, and it's so accurate that you can actually get FAA authorized certifications, type certifications by doing that type of training. We also do what we call the boats, essentially. That can hover up onto land, so you can take large loads for the Navy, bring them up onto land a little bit, move product, move cargo around, weapons, sensors, those types of things. Biggest customer, of course, being the United States government. And then in the industrial segment here, this consists of mostly what we call our Textron Specialty Vehicles brands, which is everything from E-Z-GO to Cushman, which is a golf cart for a factory in our industrial setting. We have Jacobson lawnmowers or turf equipment for municipalities as well as golf courses, snowmobiles with Arctic Cat, and then Kautex, which produces fuel tanks for the automotive industry. It's a plastic injection molded fuel tank, which is lighter than the old technology And that's a very global business because the automotive industry requires suppliers to be by their factories, which is all over the world. Lastly, as I said, we do have a small finance business unit. We used to be in the business of providing loans to really everything from golf courses to resorts to hotels. We now focus this, ever since the 2008 financial crisis, into pretty much only our own products. So customers that want to buy an aircraft or a helicopter, we have financing available for that. So that's Textron, and check us out next week at the career fair. I'll now delve into supply chain topics. Supply chain is, first off, a great place to work because I was telling a group earlier today, you will interact with people across the whole business, from sales to marketing to engineering to operations. There's really not a function that supply chain doesn't interact with, and that makes it a great place to work because there's lots of challenges. Sometimes even within your own company, you'll have competing priorities, and supply chain is often found mediating that and being in the middle. But I want to talk through just a few topics here. The first is, what's the role of supply chain in a company? I want to go through contract terms and conditions, and I'll try not to make that boring. But I think it's important because there's a lot more to a contract than I think what meets the eye. Talk a little bit about sourcing strategies, how to pick your supplier, how to get the best deal, how to manage cash for a business, and then a little bit on automation and creating a digital supply chain, things that are happening today through e-commerce, at least at our company. So first off, what's the role of supply chain? There's not a single role. That's the first answer. Most importantly, though, I would say it's actually customer service and sales, believe it or not. Because every deal that you make with a supplier has implications on the end customer. And I can give examples. If we want to get a very good deal on an engine, we can actually sacrifice what's called engine life, which is how long the airplane can fly without having to have service to the engine. You could sacrifice liability. You could sacrifice warranty. All kinds of things that the customer may or may not care about go into that overall commercial deal. So at the end of the day, supply chain is actually working on customer service, whether it's through having parts available in the aftermarket, having aircraft or whatever the product is deliver on time, or helping customers solve quality problems in the field that result in fixing supplier component issues. So it's a customer service role. It has a huge impact on the finances of a business, probably in a way more so, at least on a short-term basis, than any other function within the company. Cost being the biggest, right? So every dollar that's saved in direct material sourcing actually is going right to the bottom line. If you think about that, if you want to go make $1 million profit, and let's say you have a 10% margin, well, you have to sell $10 million of product to make $1 million of profit. But in supply chain, if you save $1 million of cost, it goes right to the bottom line immediately. So huge impact on cost of sales, also overhead and indirect expenses as well. It has a huge impact on cash flow, which we'll talk about. So negotiating payment terms, how long you can hold off before you have to pay your vendors. It helps with net working capital quite a bit. And then overall operating expenses, everything from overhead services to making sure that material is available so operations is being as efficient as possible. Supply chain mitigates business risk. When you work a deal, you have to look at who you're choosing, making sure that product can continuously be supplied, obviously, but you also have to look at liabilities that come with doing business, especially in certain industries like ours, in aerospace. If there was an accident, God forbid, an accident because a bad component on an airplane failed, who's liable for that, all those damages? So you have to take those things into consideration when you're negotiating a deal. Product support, obviously working with engineering. In many cases, supply chain is the first function in a business that's bringing forward new ideas or innovation for engineering to be, basically educated on. A lot of times suppliers are working on technologies that the engineering group is not aware of, so we're helping coordinate that. And then obviously there's societal responsibilities, picking companies that are ethical to work with as your supply base, not wasting materials, being green, all of those things. There's a moral and ethical responsibility piece, as I said, that comes with supply chain, and innovation I think I talked about as well. So terms and conditions, and I think if you're supply chain majors, you get into some of these. It's rather amazing to me when you negotiate a deal, how fast you can actually get to an agreement on the price, or what we call the commercial aspect, the payment terms, the price, the lead time, and how long it takes to work on everything else. And I'm talking magnitudes of 10x. And you say, well, what is everything else? Everything else is what you see on the screen here. So when you're doing a deal, when you're doing a negotiation, the price, although that's the fun part, that happens pretty quickly. These things take time. They take lawyers in some cases to look at. But there's a lot of different pieces that have to be considered. Everything from how long is the agreement and how can you cancel it if you need to. That's termination and settlement. Intellectual property, who owns the design of whatever product's being created and how can it be used. Jurisdiction, if we have a dispute, where is it going to get settled at in court? Would you rather do it in court or would you rather do arbitration? There's different strategies there. Shipping terms, liability terms, price escalation, what's the price going to be over time? In aerospace, price, this is a big deal because when we buy, let's say, an engine or an avionics suite for an airplane, we never replace that, at least not for a long time, because it's extremely expensive to redesign a system and then go through the certification process with the FAA. So when you pick an engine for an airplane, it's staying with the airplane for decades, 20, 30 years. Well, obviously there's going to be inflation during that time period. So how do you pick a price escalation? How do you negotiate that so you can control what your cost is and make that for a long period deal? Government requirements, this especially happens in defense products. There's additional rules that have to be followed. Force majeure, what happens if there's a hurricane, if there's an act of God, how does that get handled? Insurance, indemnification, so who's going to cover who in court when we have liabilities. Lots of things that go into a deal beyond just what the price is. That's the point. So when it comes to sourcing strategies, what we use in aerospace can be best described in this graph here. And again, it's because aerospace is a little unique. It's not a retail industry. You can't just turn things over every so often. You're partnering with certain suppliers for decades for those particular airplanes. But on this scale here, we try to categorize suppliers into one of four groups. And there's two variables to be considered. One is how important they are to us as a supplier. And then the other is how much competition there is in that particular commodity that we're buying. So I'll go through some examples here. The first category, strategic partner, is one where there's not a lot of competition, but when we make a deal, we're in business together maybe for a very long time, and if our supplier is not successful, then we're not successful, and we don't have any options that are at least cheap. So engines, as I mentioned earlier, is a strategic partner. We have one time to apply leverage, and that's when we're designing a new airplane and we're picking who's going to be the engine provider. After that point, we're done. It will cost an immense amount of money to basically change out engines from Pratt & Whitney to General Electric or what have you. You almost are at a point where you might as well just redesign a whole new airplane. So we have to have a strategic partnership with our engine providers. That contract gets a lot longer because it's for a longer period of time, and there's so many more things that need to be considered because us as the OEM, as the buyer, we have no option but to get it right the first time. So we beat each other up in the negotiation one time, and then from that point forward, we really try to partner and do what's best for both of our companies. If you have a supplier where there's not, by the way, there's not a lot of engine suppliers. There's a handful, so not a lot of competition. If you have a situation where you have, let's say, not a lot of competition for that particular commodity, but it's also not quite as important for your product. We call that a development supplier. And what that means is we're going to have to help them out. We don't have options, so we're going to have to help them from an engineering perspective, or maybe we provide upfront payments to fund their investments that they're going to make in their intellectual property design or qualification or what have you. So if there's a new product, they're very important to us, but there's just not a lot of competitors out there. I'll give you an example. GoGo Internet. Anybody familiar with GoGo Internet? You've been on an airplane and you use the Wi-Fi. GoGo Internet for us is in this place here. Is the internet required to fly the plane? No. Nowadays it's painful to fly without it, but it's not required. But there's really, for us, no other competitors in that space. And the reason is, in general aviation, our airplanes are smaller than a big business or a big commercial jet like a Boeing or Bombardier airplane. So we can't fit antennas on the airplane that can use a satellite-based system with high speeds. We have to use an air-to-ground system, which is just like a cell phone tower, essentially. And GoGo is really the only company in the world right now that owns an air-to-ground system that can actually work up in the air on an airplane. So they're a development supplier in that we need them. We don't need them, they're not overly critical. There's not a lot of competition though, so we help them, they help us. When you get into the spaces where you have a lot of competition, you have more power. And the first I'll talk about is a commodity. To us, a commodity is there's a lot of competition. I can change them out pretty easily, and I should change them out, or at least check them with the market frequently. So raw materials, aluminum. Aluminum is aluminum. If I'm buying it from one company to the next, there's specifications, it meets the specifications, we have some leverage there. Hardware. Machine parts is a big one. There's a lot of machine houses around the country, around the world. In our case, we actually own the design of those machine parts. We're just asking somebody to produce it for us. We make those contracts very short, and we turn them over frequently because we have competition and we always need to be checking the market, and we can save money by doing that. You have a lot of leverage there. It's the stick beating type negotiation tactic. And then if you're in a space where there's a lot of competition, but it's also very important to you, you might not want to beat with the stick too much. We call that kind of first come, first serve, which is we beat them, we look very aggressively in the marketplace for what the best deal is, and then when we choose it, even though we could turn it over, because they're important and we want to kind of align our strategies, we maybe give a little more grace in that space. So it's a good way to kind of stratify your supply base and figure out which tactic of negotiation you should use. Maybe. I think you're just lucky, Dr. Aschenbaum. Of course, the slide building part here. Okay, so negotiation tactics, to further that a little more. Rule number 1, always portray that you have competition, always, even when you don't. And in our roundtable discussion, we were talking about this a little bit too, but you always have to pretend that you have competition and make your supplier think that you have options, that you're not cornered, even if it's fake. So we were giving an example where we brought in a couple suppliers to a bidders conference. We had engineering go through the requirements in front of the suppliers, say here's what we need, and we brought in some actors. Now these actors were employees of ours, and we pretended that they were companies from China and Mexico, and they had fake name badges, and we put them in the room with the other suppliers that we knew it was down between. One, it was fun, but two, we were trying to create a little bit of a perception that we had options, so very important there. You're just lucky. Patience is important. I am an engineer by schooling, and I have been learning this with my team. If you show you're too eager, it will backfire on you. In supply chain, you have to have patience. Even when you get the answer that you want, put your poker face on, don't smile. go in your office, close the door, do a fist pump, whatever. But show patience. It takes a long time to actually get to the result you want. And if you're too eager, you'll lose. Show a lot of emotion when you're dissatisfied, but none when you are satisfied. Again, kind of plays off of what I just said. Explain your options. Always let the supplier know, well, if you're going to do this, then I'm going to do that. I had a supplier come in and want to give us a 30% increase on a seat for an airplane. All right, I said, fine, then we'll just take the seat that we have on the other model, which is your competitor, and just put it in your spot. Done. Explain their consequences. Same thing. Here's what will happen to you if you do that. This one's amazing to me because it seems silly, but it's true. It happens in almost every experience I've had. Is negotiate with extreme positions. You know, don't be afraid to go too low with your price, because you'll never know. Sometimes they'll say yes. You can always go up, and the old start low and they start high, and you end up in the middle. It happens a lot. That's kind of how it works. Give on small points, and then remind the supplier of the small points that you gave on. Something that doesn't affect you. Also look at it from the vantage point of what's really important to them that's not so important to you. And sometimes that can go a really long way. An example there too, along those lines, is product. If you need to get money out of people, it's easier for suppliers to give product than it is to give cash. Because product, they still get to run it through their factory and absorb overhead, and really they're only paying for the variable portion of the product, right? All the fixed portion they're going to pay for regardless. But for us, the buyer, the product is still value. If you get $1 million product, they can give you $1 million of value. Really, it only costs them, 50% of that, $500,000, but you get $1 million of cost savings in your cost of sales. So think of it from that vantage point as well. Leave something at the end that you're willing to give. In some cases, they'll make a big point and just put it aside, wait till the end. Take breaks. This is also a big thing too. Don't be afraid if you're in a negotiation to say, we got to step out. We need to have a team meeting on our own. And it's better to do that than to be on a different page with a colleague of yours who's taking a different angle. Don't make it personal. And also do your homework on the supplier. Know what's important to them, know their product, know their competitors. So just a list of tactics to try to use. I'd also say know your industry, because the sourcing methodology you use is very different by industry. In retail, if you're working for Walmart or Amazon, you have all the power in the world, and you're going to let the supplier know that every single day. In other industries like aerospace, you're partnering, or if you're doing capital purchasing, that kind of thing, you're partnering. So look at the volumes, look at the regulation, understand those different dynamics. I like to talk about what the difference is between aerospace and automotive. Aerospace is a low mix but high mix but low volume industry. Automotive is the opposite. So you can't always look at low cost regions of the world when you're only going to produce, in our case, 20 a year or 50 a year. It's cheaper labor, but the headaches with dealing with logistics and time zone challenges and all that are just not worth it. So know your industry and understand the strategy around that. Defense versus industrial, also a very, very different procurement model. Anybody had an internship at a defense company in procurement? Yeah, totally different, right? And also kind of teaches you that your tax dollars could be used more efficiently, right? Because it's all about regulation and compliance to the regulation, and not necessarily common sense. But the compliance is so key, and you'll lose business if you're not compliant. So, transitioning a little bit to a different topic within supply chain, cash management. I like to always ask a trick question, right? Can a profitable company go bankrupt? And the answer is yes. profitable companies do go bankrupt. How do they go bankrupt? What causes bankruptcy is cash management, not being able to pay the bills, not necessarily what profit is. They're different metrics. And I'm sure you all, if at least the supply chain majors, have read The Goal by Eli Goldratt. That's the best, supply chain book, in my opinion, you can read, and the author takes you through this concept very well. But often in most companies, the purchase orders between or payables, that's the most net working capital that's tied up in terms of cash. So supply chain has a huge impact, of course, on the accounts payables. So what can you do to improve cash flow? What we do at Textron Aviation is a few different things. First off, we have what we call a supplier-owned inventory program. Basically what it is we require the supplier on our contract to consign inventory, put it in our warehouse, and it's on their books, and we don't pay for it. We don't actually start the payment clock until we need it. When our production line needs it, that's what actually starts the payment clock. So it allows us to postpone when we're actually buying, so it marries up with the exact usage need date for our operations team. So that's one way we try to do that. We've got hundreds of millions of dollars of consigned inventory actually in our warehouse, ready for us whenever we need it, but it's not on our asset books. We have supplier program contributions. So when we develop an airplane, we'll go to the big suppliers, like the engine providers and the avionics providers, and say, look, if you want to win business, not only do we need certain prices, but you need to give us however many millions of dollars of just cash payments to help fund our engineering. That helps from a cash flow standpoint. Because they know that they're going to be partnering with us and we're going to create a revenue stream for them, so they contribute to the overall investment of that product. And then, of course, the other big one is payment terms. There's a lot of neat things that we're working on here with payment terms. Obviously, you want them to be longer, but there's some tools out there now where you can actually set rates of money, cost of money on a portal, Reba Pay, which is part of SAP, which is what we're looking at and using now. We'll let you say, okay, we'll sign up for standard payment terms of 2% net 60. So you could take a 2% discount within the first 10 days, otherwise you pay, in 60 days out. But maybe we want to give the supplier an option and say, we'll prorate that, and if you want to take payment early because you need cash, fine, but there's going to be a discount between day 10 and day 60 in the payment terms. And we're okay with it, and let the supplier actually make the decision if they want to take it or not. So there's a lot of neat things going on in this field in terms of payment terms and how to pay suppliers electronically, and set money rates and based on what your business needs at the time. Because sometimes you need discounts because you want to help profit. Discounts help profit, but longer payment terms help cash. And depending what you need in a quarter or at that particular time, you may have a different goal. And then when it comes to automation and digitization, I think you're reading a lot about this. You probably know more about this than I even do, but Amazon and Walmart, they've changed the world with how business is done, how supply chains operate. Everything's electronic. Everything's is done digitally. So we're doing that as well. First off, when it comes to the actual procurement methods, we've got the ability to set that up on an automated fashion, so purchase orders automatically release when requirements show up, demand requirements. We put things on reorder points, so we don't have to manage the forecast. It just automatically, whenever the stock goes below a level, we reorder. We have min-max systems where our portal that all of our suppliers go to can see what our inventory level is and how it compares to what we told them the minimum is and the maximum is we want to have on the shelf at any time. We do electronic Kanbans, those types of things. But everything we're trying to do is through a portal. It reduces the labor, and it cuts down on phone calls and meetings that you have to have with the supplier. We allow the supplier to actually see their demand forecasts. We allow them to see their purchase orders that are coming to them, their accounts payables when those are due. They can see the inventory levels on their parts. They're required to print out what we call an ASN, Advanced Shipment Notice, which is a packing sheet with a barcode on it that they put on the box of their product when they ship it to us, so that when it comes to our receiving dock, we scan it, it automatically receives everything in, the order quantity, the supplier code, the product number, all of that, cost. everything done, electronically. So more and more of this is happening, and it's really amazing the technologies that are evolving in this space in terms of traceability. I mean, you can see the serial number from a part that a supplier produces all the way to when a customer takes it off in the field and needs a new one. So a lot of very good work here. So that's just some general content when it comes to supply chain. I'll now kind of transition into some more of the fun parts, which is what I'll call story time. So 4 stories to go through. The first is what I'm calling the all-nighter story. And I'll give you the situation here. We were working on a deal for an engine for a new airplane called the Sky Courier with a supplier, Pratt & Whitney, Canada. Hopefully none of your family work there, because I'm going to tell some detail here. But this was a long back and forth negotiation. Honestly, it was about 6 months of different meetings and phone calls and this and that. And we had a deadline. We wanted to go to a trade show, which was taking place about a year ago in October, and we wanted to be able to say, here's the new airplane and here's the engine that's on it. So we basically told them to book a flight, come to our place for the week, and fly out on Friday. And when it came to Thursday and we weren't done, we told them no one's going home until we get this thing done. We've been working on it for 6 months. We need to finish it. They looked at us a little puzzled, and we said, no one's going home. Do you agree? Do you want to get this done? Yeah, we want to get this done. So sure enough, just like in college, it was the first all-nighter I think I pulled since college, we stayed there in a conference room the entire night, and it was funny because as people got tired, they started giving in on points. They would say, okay, fine, the language in that paragraph is good, let's move on. And things just started coming together. We got more done between the hours of midnight and 4 a.m. than we did the 6 months prior. And it was all because we had a deadline, we didn't let them out of there, they were exhausted, we were exhausted. I took a picture, a selfie of myself in the conference room, and I sent it to my wife and said, I'm not out living some promiscuous lifestyle right now, I swear I'm still at work. And she did appreciate that. But it was a great story. We did get it done. We signed it actually around 7 a.m. They all went right to the airport. Probably needed showers, but just the tactic I guess you can use. We did in this case here, so that was a fun one. The second I'll call fake news, and that's because that's a popular term nowadays. But we had a supplier, I won't give you the name. They had some late deliveries that were impacting us, and it cost us some money. Obviously, late deliveries cost your factory money because you're not as efficient. So I went to finance and spent about 2 weeks with them. Hey, please help us understand what was the cost impact of having these late deliveries. And then they came back and they couldn't really get good data, and you'll find that a lot of times. And they said, we can only account for $80,000 of cost. And I said, no, this is much more impactful than $80,000. We're not going to go with your recommendation of telling them they owe us $80,000. So we put a spreadsheet together. In about 5 minutes, we made up fake data. And those are the numbers right there. Just because they looked good, they felt good. And we send that over to the supplier in a claim, and we said, this is what you owe us. And they were a little shocked at first, and they asked for more detail. So we made more detail that consisted of more fake data and sent that over to them. And we did this for about 3 weeks, and then they finally just said, all right, let's just settle. And they gave us $500,000. So the point here was we could have taken the $80,000 recommendation from finance, and we would have settled up short. We got $500,000, and I took that back to finance and said, I'm never asking for your numbers again. And it was a lot of fun. But fake news, don't tell my suppliers, please. The third is what I call the Jerry Maguire, help me help you. And this is a case here where we had a very poor performing supplier from a quality standpoint, from a cost standpoint, and we went to their competitor and we said, we've got a deal, but it comes under a couple conditions. You can take all this business from your supplier, but here's what we need. We need this price, we need you to give us this contribution, and take some products that they really didn't want. So we bundled things together, some things that they were okay with, some things that they were not okay with, said it was an all-inclusive deal, and we helped them basically win the award. It solved the problem for us, and it was a huge win for them because they stole share from their competitor. And then the fourth I'll call hardball, and I have a friend here, a picture of a colleague of mine, Ruben Favela. He works in our Chihuahua, Mexico factory, and they do actually work ourselves, sub-assembly work for airframe structure. So you see a picture there of a cabin skin of one of our business jets being built at one of our suppliers. This contract came up, and the supplier said, hey, we need a price increase of whatever percent, and we said no, we're not going to accept it, and bantered back and forth a little bit, and then we said, look, if you're going to give us that price increase, we're going to move the work to our Mexico facility. And they said, no, you're not. That's too much of an undertaking. So it called Ruben up, my friend, and said, Ruben, I need you to get your tape measure, your laser measures, bring the whole crew, come with me. I'm going to drop you off at the front. This supplier is local, too. Drop you off at the front door, and I need you to go in there and just start taking measurements of tools, pretend you're collecting data to figure out how to move it. So we went to their facility, and we showed up with a group of our employees from Chihuahua, and they all had their tape measures, and they took measurements, and the next day, the president called us back and said, all right, no price increase, we good? And we won. So again, all of this is about creating the perception that you have options. So we're doing on time, but perfect. So with that, that's all my prepared content, but I'll open it up to the floor for questions about Textron, about supply chain, or really anything. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. So any questions? I think we have 10 minutes or so? Okay.
Now, we need a few questions. Give them to us.
Yes, sir.
We're having locations in Mexico and Canada, so international trade is used a lot. How does that affect your supply chain?
Yes, so that's a great question nowadays, right, with the trade war. A couple things I'll say. So first off, I don't know yet. I think it's still changing, right? It's still evolving, and I don't know where the dust is going to settle. I think what you see in the news and what's happening right now is probably worse than what it'll end up be. I don't think you're going to have these high of tariffs. I think there'll be something less. For us, we have a little bit of protection because we have contracts, and the contracts actually have locked-in prices for so many years. When those contracts expire, then yeah, we'll be exposed a little bit to the tariffs. So we are okay right now. We're kind of just watching it. We don't have anything that's major that's hitting us. Our contracts say tariffs can't be passed through. And we don't tell our suppliers where to build their product or where to source their product. So that's our position right now. I will tell you though, we are seeing increased lead times in certain commodities because other companies are starting to buy stuff from other areas, and it's the demand and supply relationship's changing. So we're going to have to fight it. I think at some point we're not going to be able to when our contracts expire, and we'll probably see some pass through that we'll have to eat. But still a lot of moving parts right now. Good question. Yes.
Trying to incorporate any elements of blockchain into sort of supply chain.
A blockchain? Yeah, a little bit. So I would tell you we're not a lot right now. Aerospace moves slower than some of the other industries. So the blockchain technology we haven't used too much right now. What else? Yes, sir.
Does the V-22 and the RQ-7 fall under a Textron system or Textronization?
The V-22 is under Bell Helicopter. Both are under Bell Helicopter. Yep. Yeah, good question.
I know Bell's working on a V-280. What are some of the differences and what they improving on the V-22 and the new V-280?
Great question. So the V-280 is what you see now. It's the big one flying. First off, the V-22 is a lot smaller, and it's geared to replace the Sikorsky Blackhawk, which is the most, there's 6,000 of those in the Army. So it's a huge amount of volume that the Army is looking to replace. What the improvements are, I would say, is mostly it's the way that the rotation is occurring. So there's a gearbox that basically has to rotate when the propeller on the V280 today, it has to rotate as the propeller rotates. On the new improved design, it actually kind of all rotates together. So there's less, the gearbox is a lot less complicated, which makes it a little bit more reliable. Beyond that, it's kind of a scaled technology, and we've learned a lot through the last 20 years of developing the V280. So it's manufacturing, it goes together easier. We learned so that, but the big thing I would say is the gearbox and how that's designed. Yeah. Up in the back, back there. All right.
Do you do a lot of data analysis in your supply chain department? What data visualization software do you most use?
What data visualization software do we use, and do we do analysis? Yes, we absolutely do analysis. Microsoft Excel is the number one used tool, first off. But no, what we actually use quite a bit is a software called ClickView. And if you're familiar with it, it's very easy to integrate data from multiple sources. So our ERP system, even spreadsheets, literally any data source you have, you could put ClickView on top of it, and then it's interactive. So you can build charts, you can dive into things, at whatever level of detail you want. So I could tell, sitting at my desk, how many shortages every single buyer in our organization has, what their trend is, which suppliers are performing, which ones aren't, how much we spend with the supplier, what we spent over the past, what their payment terms are. It's all through dashboards that we set up using ClickView. Yes, sir.
With procurement with military systems, do you ever run issues with classified information or classified systems and having your buyers meeting with security clearances?
At aviation we don't, but at Textron Systems, yes, they do. And there are certain technologies that are classified. And then that requires the employees working on or touching those technologies to have levels of classification security passes. So in certain cases, there'll be rooms that are locked and only so-and-so engineers can go in there and so-and-so procurement personnel. And there's different levels of those technologies and different levels of clearances. But it's pretty neat. Yes, ma'am.
Let me ask you a question. But do you, within your supply chain department, require that your employees have an aviation background?
Do we require that employees have an aviation background? No, we do not. We do not. I mean, it's certainly an added bonus, but I would say most people don't have an aviation background. I don't. You come into the industry and you learn it. We do offer pilot training at a discounted rate. So anybody that wants to work on a pilot's license, you can do it for about half the price if you were to do it on your own. There's a club, actually, of employee-run club of airplanes that the company puts up and lets them rent it out to each other and learn how to fly. So it's a neat perk. Other questions? Sorry? The top. Okay, there we are.
With regards to one of those things, that $900,000 set of rate fees, what degree does supply chain handle that versus a legal office?
Good question. So for those that didn't hear it, what degree of the settlement is legal supporting versus supply chain? And it depends on the topic, but mostly if it's numbers, if it's cost, it's completely commercial, it's completely supply chain. Legal comes into play when it comes into default of contract or interpretation of certain language within the contract. But when it's commercial, it's just business.
So with that $900,000 versus $80,000, there's no risk of running a fraud case or anything like that?
No, we had a negotiation. We settled it. I mean, they didn't have to pay it. The contract said that they are responsible for damages. Then you can decide how you want to prove out what those damages are. You can do it through negotiation, which is cheaper because you don't have to bring lawyers into it, or you can do it through the legal process, and the contract has a process laid out for how that's done. If we were to go through the court system, it wouldn't have happened, right? But it was completely done as a business deal. So.
The real question is, did the supplier improve after that?
Did the supplier improve? Yes, they did. They did on that line. They have a couple other ones we're working on, but yes. Yeah. Anything else?
Thanks again.
Okay, well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
This little VPN box kept popping up and I kept having to minimize. I think that might